And good afternoon, LinkedIn Live. I think we're live. What a day. Only in America, a few feet away from the OK Boomer studio. By the way, I'm Steve Ferreira. You can call me Steve Ferreira, CEO of Ocean Audit, also known as the lapel pin guy, host of OK Boomer TV or OK Boomer Live. I have so many different names. I'm sorry, folks. I can't keep them straight. What a great country. A few doors down from the OK Boomer Studios in Connecticut, we have a rhythmic gymnastics lesson taking place from Moscow with a live teacher. it's, it's crazy what goes on here. We have a Roomba, an iRobot that's working the floors of the palatial studios. And we've got me here talking about LinkedIn Live and Federal Maritime Commission on a really crazy Thursday. But I am dedicated to the channel, and my main goal is to help all my clients out there that I love so much. And yeah, I just want to make sure we're live here. I just want to check my feed. Oh, good, we are live. Good, good, good. Yeah, one day I'm going to have to do a show where we just focus on the back office operations, what's going on here. I mean, you literally have three computers. You have Steve, and you have me pushing buttons on every one of them and trying to walk and chew gum at the same time. It is a lot harder than it looks, but certainly getting the hang of it. So I want to talk about today's program. I think about clients that run into pricing and dispute issues with the vendors. And as we see a magnitude of vendors, with the NVOCCs, 3PLs, 4PLs, pardon me, disputes are inevitable. And I think that one of the problems that I see is when clients start to work with, a local NVO that may not be maybe a middle market NVO, maybe not so well known. They start to lose maybe the ability to have the strength of decisiveness and purity and righteousness on their side in an ocean freight overcharge or demurrage or dispute chassis type pricing activity that ends up going sideways on them. And I think that one of the issues on the framework of this particular episode is, people know me as a ocean audit expert, right? I can take on the world and, get you a refund in 96 hours. And it's pretty true in terms of, my strengths in terms of understanding the pricing dynamics of ocean freight and the dispute managements of ocean freight better than anyone. And that leads me to, not often, but, in three cases in the last 3 years, I've been an expert witness for clients that have filed activities or actions against their freight forwarder, NVO, steamship line because of some wrong that they couldn't solve. And I think the issue is that even someone like myself, where these particular cases or issues are, some are extraordinarily complex, some were not so complex. But I think the Federal Maritime Commission, as the weight behind maritime and the trade that's happening in the U.S. with the FMC regulating ocean freight trade, it gives clients, I think, a new ray of hope, right? So, I mean, I've had clients from that have been really a bit less than educated on the right way to go about a dispute. Take a dispute all the way to the FMC and get an award. So there are great mechanisms. And who hasn't had a dispute, with their ocean vendor, right? And how many of you out there have said to yourself, hey, I blew 25 grand, or I should have had a 25 grand pricing decrease, or that demurrage detention bill shouldn't have counted to the magnitude that it did. And so these are real world problems that my friends and logistics managers, traffic managers, distribution guys, and finance guys and supply chain guys are working through, and gals. And so the Federal Maritime Commission is a great way to resolve these disputes. And I think that the thought process is, well, Steve, it's really hard. We've got to have a lawyer in there and spend some funds. The reality is, many disputes under $50,000 can be solved free of charge, or with a very small fee, $200, $300, $400. I'm going to get into that a little bit in the 3 or 4 slides. But I think the Federal Maritime Commission has really gone mainstream, right? It's kind of been this, you can, again, I have many friends there, so I don't want this to come off the wrong way. I don't want it to seem like old and stodgy, right? Like OK Boomer is. So, sorry, it's just a little joke. But the thing is that the FMC is kind of like, it's like, okay, tariffs, we don't want tariffs. You guys take away tariffs. They don't like tariffs, the freight forwarders, NVOs. And I don't blame them. I mean, I made my fortune in monitoring tariffs. And now it's doing auditing a different way to make the same amount of money, even more. But tariffs have been something that the FMC had to deal with. And now it's not so commonplace to have a quote unquote tariff to regulate ocean trade. So I think that one of the things about the Federal Maritime Commission that I love is they went kind of with a alternative dispute resolution body, a board that's staffed with a few really cool people. And they'll listen to both sides of, the shipper and the beneficial cargo owner. And if they can't figure out a way to rationalize the case or, pull one party in the right direction, then there's some alternatives. But I'm going to get it right now into the FMC and how they can be just a huge savior in terms of fixing the disputes between yourself and your ocean vendors, especially as it relates to issues that pop up in freight waves in the JOC all the time, right? Demurrage, detention, chassis. So there is hope, right? And I want you to all, go back and look and say, hey, what's the toughest issue we have? Have we ever had an issue like Steve's describing? As long as it falls within 3 years of when the event happened, chances are the Federal Maritime Commission can help you resolve it. All right, so without further ado, let's jump into our deck, and I can take you through the issues at hand here. So I think, let me just model this a bit better, and you can see me, and you can see the deck, and now we're great. We're in great shape. Let me present that. Whoops. So we have this little thing at the bottom here I'm not too happy about. Oh, there we go. Anyway, there we go. All right. Thank God. So have you been wronged in ocean? This is solutions for the Federal Maritime Commission and your options. By the way, just for those that just joined, so I'm Steve Ferreira. Please follow me. If you click on my profile, I don't have a connect button. I have a follow me button. So you'll be able to get all my content. And just a shout out, although my first love is on LinkedIn, I thank them from the bottom of my heart for being one of 500 consistent broadcasters out of 300 million users. I am also live streaming on YouTube under OK Boomer Live TV is my channel there. OK Boomer Live TV. Okay, so on to the program. Filing a Shipping Act complaint if you have a dispute. You know what? Let's go to this first, because I think that the audience is probably wants to know, well, what types of disputes can I talk about recovery options on if I'm not getting anywhere with my ocean carrier, freight forwarder, even customs house broker or NVO or 4PL. The FMC has a wide swath of ability to handle anything related to the Shipping Act. What's related to the Shipping Act? Well, some of the items, and not an all-inclusive list, are obviously ocean freight pricing, historic, current, or even future. Future I throw in there because let's say you're doing a deal now and because of what's happening, or space, or the NSA, or your service contract, something happens that you get locked into a future rate that you don't want to be in. There's a lot of mechanisms to look at that. And again, your first rule of thumb should always be to negotiate, or try to negotiate the issue with your vendor. But I realize that's not always possible. And that's why the FMC exists here. Detention and demurrage, huge issues, inland transportation, chassis disputes. So there's a lot of issues, I think, that make for a good mediation or informal complaint. You'll hear me use the word mediation, alternative dispute mediation, informal complaint, and formal complaint. It's really, really basic when it comes to the types of issues that the FMC can handle. And we'll get into why, what those reasons are for that, and how the FMC handles that. So filing a Shipping Act complaint is pretty simple. As I mentioned, the first paragraph there, and this will be on demand for you to review this, but the Alternative Dispute Resolution Services is my favorite. So it's really a low cost, I forget if there's a $200 or $250 filing fee for the ADR services, but it's really minimal. And there's a website link that I can point you to onto the fmc.gov website. But it's a super way to get the mediator to look at the case that you're in. I think that, again, I have a perfect 3-0 record in terms of cases that have made it to this level, to the FMC. And one of the reasons why my cases have been so perfect is that it's very unusual to have a lot of pricing expertise and background, right? When you're talking to attorneys. I mean, I've been under depositions, and let me tell you, even though it wasn't my money at stake, nobody wants to be on a deposition, because I mean, I had one time 5 lawyers grilling me, and there's a stenographer or one of those keyboard court things, and it's going, and it's like, you're feeling a little hot under the collar, but you need those expertise chops to really help a client earmark that a case is going to go the right way. But I think before it gets to that, deposition style, where you're getting into more of a formalized type claim, using alternative resolution services that the FMC can moderate, they've got a great team there, is really, I think, the way to go, initial stage one. And here's why it's so important, because, if you think about it, the mediator will sit down, I think a Zoom phone call, or, they do it a great way. And so they'll listen to the ocean carrier, they'll listen to you. And, it's really good because they try, in their own way to show the carrier or the client that, the pricing was this, and, did you have this in place? And if you didn't have this, then, maybe we should look at it a different way. So I think it gets all parties, and if they're retained by counsel, it's almost like a preview of, how the case might go. And so just to give you an example of the players, right? So in an alternative dispute, you'd have a mediator. But if you start to go into a formal and informal and formal case, you would have more of a administrative law judge that is, has the full power to invoke, tens or hundreds or millions of dollars in judgments, just like a federal court judge. So you really want to kind of go through the alternative dispute resolution before your case goes to an ALJ, administrative law justice or judge, because those cases can be quite long and elongated. And I think that certainly the money involved and the legal fees, is something a client has to keep in mind. So I think that a small claims complaint, there's a small claims complaint. Let's say you don't want to do any kind of mediation. You're so clear cut on, the fact that you were violated by an overcharge. So a claim of $50,000 or less, I think there's a $200 or $300 filing fee. Probably depending on the claim size, if it's say $5,000, $7,000, $10,000, $15,000, you can probably get someone on Upwork or a contract attorney to take you through it. A lot of these cases that I've been involved with, the lawyers have some Federal Maritime Commission, case chops, meaning they have some cases under their belt. The Federal Maritime Commission wants to see a certain style and structure when these claims are presented. But there are people that represent themselves, pro se, they call it, I think. And, it's not out of the question. I think I did a case 7-10 years ago. I didn't count it as part of my 3-0 record, but I think it was a $10,000 case, and I did it all myself for the client and was successful. So those claims for $50,000 or less, it's a little less more, a little more informal, but yet still has the same legal clout as a county court or a federal or a governmental court type judgment. And certainly anything in the above 50,000, I've seen cases where there's been millions of dollars at stake. There was a famous automobile collusion case many years ago against some of the Japanese. There's been a lot of cases that have had big ticket items, and certainly those take, in my humble opinion, 1, 2, and even 3 years to settle, right, because of the magnitude of them. So that's really a formal complaint, and it's probably the most severe or serious type complaint. I think most of the audience members that are watching me today, I'm Steve Ferrer, OK Boomer Live. I run Ocean Audit, and I'm giving advice today on the Federal Maritime Commission and dispute managements. But I think most of my clients, or most of the beneficial cargo owners out there, shippers, would fall into the 90% are going to fall into the alternative dispute resolution mode or the small claims mode. And certainly, reach out to me, and I can kind of steer you in terms of which mode I think you'd be best situated for. And now that I think about it, the nice thing too is that I think initially most corporate counsels can kind of handle the initial stages, and I am going to go on the fence a little bit that says you might not have to pull the trigger on a Federal Maritime Commission attorney, at $400 or $500 or $600 per hour, unless I sit down with you and say, hey, geez, you really got an incredibly ironclad case here. So I can help in kind of steering the CFO and the counsel of your companies to my position on a case. I certainly would I feel I do that all the time. And certainly looking at that, I can say, okay, well, there's 4 guys in Washington, D.C. that are the best in their game, on representing clients. And you'll see them at TPMs and global conferences. It's this is one of those little silent but kind of quiet areas of container shipping that a lot of us don't really take heed of. But I think we should, because it's such an important area. So just continuing on, I talked about the types of disputes, and I kind of vacillated on how to present this first or second, but I just did want to indicate types of disputes that you might consider. So in closing this particular chapter, the disputes that the Federal Maritime Commission hears or listens to, the disputes are agnostic in the sense that you can file against a steamship line, an NVOCC, 3PL, 4PL. It really is not limited to just, let's say, traditional ocean carrier. If you think about a carrier that has their own ships and containers. In fact, I would go out there on a limb and say that the most interesting cases that I think are appropriate to look at are cases where you as the shipper or importer or exporter have worked with a 3PL or 4PL that might be on the fringe between a freight forwarder, an ocean transportation intermediary, and perhaps somewhat dabbling or acting as an NVOCC. Maybe they issued an ocean bill on an airway bill, and they're kind of skirting the legalities of what they're authorized to do and not to do. So I would encourage, certainly, out of that 5,000 number of ocean vendors, certainly 0 to 100, The top 100 are, serious and substantial players, and you have, the mid tier, in I don't know 500 to 3,000 ranked in terms of NVO. And again, I'm surprised. I'm surprised every day because many of these names are new to me, and even being in the trade 34 years. So, I mean, one of my cases, I had never even heard of the NVO before. So it just goes to show you some of the opportunities that I think are out there. So just in concluding, do you need a attorney? Again, that's probably the most pertinent question or frequent question that I get asked, is that you really don't need an attorney if you're talking about $5,000, $10,000. I think that there's a hybrid situation in play here where many corporate attorneys that are already part of your counsel can work with someone like myself and understand the legwork involved and the risk reward. Okay, how much is the harm? Is it 10,000? Okay, we can hire an FMC guy, or we can do it ourselves. And Steve, do you want Steve to be an expert witness? Yes or no? So I mean, there's a variable where I think you have to do a cutoff between getting legal help. But certainly, I think if it's over 50,000, you definitely need at least the initial corporate counsel's ability to say, okay, this is an interesting case. Steve's take on it is this, or the expert's take on it is this. We feel it's winnable. How do we get it back, right? And because maybe it's a $500,000 case, and so one of the most interesting aspects of these mediations. I'm sorry, I botched that. I don't want to mix up mediation and a formal complaint. The formal complaint is the most important kind, right? Because it's the highest value. But one of the important features of the formal complaint is that depending on the situation at hand, the legal fees can be awarded as part of the complaint. So you could put in, $20,000, $30,000 hypothetically in legal fees, and if you are victorious, then the other side has to compensate on the legal fees. It's my belief that in looking at the cases at hand, and let me just close this here because that really concludes the show and tell portion. But I think that settlement options increase 90+% when you have somebody on your side. Again, whether it's me, a trusted friend that's in the ocean business, an advisor, a consultant, your odds of winning go from 25% to close to 75 to 90% if you have an expert that's able to evaluate whether you have a case in the first place. Now, I specifically, clients would come to me all the time and say, Steve, you got us back, a couple $100,000, can you do our RFQ? And I really, I punted on that, right? I did a couple, but the risk reward, it's far, my love is recovery, right? So whether it's recovery of the ocean overcharge or to right or wrong, I love that side of it as opposed to like the RFQ and RFP side of it, which to me is more, kind of more engineering, kind of control yard work, and I'm me personally, I'm much more of a creative thinker that, wants to help you outside the box. So, maybe one of the things you could do as a takeaway, or, those that watch the replay, think of a case, or think of a situation in the last couple of years where you were really wronged. It's like, we all know those cases where, logistics manager on a Friday has gone in and talked to the CFO or his boss, and, somebody's out 50 grand, or there's an issue, right? Or the plug on the refrigerated unit failed, and you're not getting your comeuppance. I mean, there are just a zillion different scenarios, and I don't pretend to cover all the scenarios and what can happen on recoveries here. But suffice to say that you should always look at where you're harmed, and because we're all craving post-COVID cash right now, I just felt that the segment was so appropriate. And I can't thank the FMC enough, because I get messages from time to time from them. Hey, Steve, thanks for helping the American public. And the FMC is all about helping the American public in terms of a fair and balanced commitment to not being harmed. So, in closing, I think that this segment has helped. I hope the segment has helped you understand better the role of the Federal Maritime Commission and how it can help you recover tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in areas where you potentially were harmed. And certainly the detention demurrage issue is a huge issue. Let me say that again, huge. I'm really working on that anchorman type voice, and this microphone is helping, but not quite. So I'm looking for, the detention demurrage. I think it's a fascinating study where we're seeing a lot of overbills, especially in the mid-tier NVOCCs. So you might want to look at that. That's a hint. And certainly anything in your service contracts or NVOCC service arrangements are also a big area of focus. And don't forget any unbundling, right? If the goods were originally on a through bill of lading, say Shanghai to Boise, Idaho, that is in play all the way. That's an FMC structured movement, even though the goods are going inland. So don't just think if the goods get off the ship, that's the end of the FMC's involvement. Any other questions, comments, concerns? I don't see anything on the screen, but message me in my LinkedIn box. Please, 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 please follow me to get more Steve Ferreira, OK Boomer Live content. And we'll have another show for you very, very quickly on the latest trends in retail and apparel, which I'm working on right now. And we'll get back to you guys on why maybe the outlook for the next couple months is not as gloom and doom as some of the pundits are predicting with soft demand. Right now, I see a really good demand, but I'll talk more about that in my next show. So until now, saying bye from the palatial studios of OK Boomer in the greater Hartford, Connecticut area. I'm Steve Ferreira. Have a great evening.